This year with a more detailed focus on the cost and timelines of introducing nuclear energy to Australia. The Coalition is promising to release its own costings on nuclear energy imminently, but we already know they're proposing the taxpayer fund the construction of 7 nuclear sites, using 2 different technologies, one well established in the world, one not. Now, as you can see, I've moved around the desk a bit because we've brought the 2 ministers together tonight for a debate about Australia's future. Chris Bowen is the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Ted O'Brien is the Shadow Minister. Both of you, you're very welcome to the programme. I'm glad to have you both here.
Evening, Ted.
Cheers, mate.
Now, that's a great way to start. Now, let's go to GenCost. So the CSIRO and the Australian Energy Market Operator, as I just mentioned, have crunched the numbers in their latest GenCost report released today. It finds that nuclear energy would still be the most expensive way to deliver low emissions energy to Australia. Do you accept that CSIRO and AEMO have the expertise to make these findings?
Sarah, I think if you're going to ask that question, I think of what the CSIRO says themselves. I asked them a couple of weeks ago this very question at a hearing of the Parliament. And when it comes to issues relating to nuclear energy, they conceded that they actually don't have the expertise like the likes of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which draws different conclusions from the CSIRO in aspects such as timing.
Just to be clear, you're saying the CSIRO told you they do not have the expertise to make the findings in this report?
Compared to the International Atomic Energy Agency, they conceded that they do not have the same degree of expertise in certain areas, including the timing, which features in their report. I think the key thing for the market operator who does the report with the CSIRO is the capital cost, because that feeds into their major plan. Now, I've only had a quick look because this was published today, and I think the capital cost of the modern, larger nuclear reactors is probably around about similar to what I've seen elsewhere. That's the key number, really, that feeds into the operator's plan.
And just to be clear, what we're talking about here is solar at 40 to 68 per megawatt hour to produce wind 65 to 108 and nuclear between $133 and $222. Let me just hand this over to Chris Bowen. So I asked there whether or not CSIRO has the expertise. I know that you think CSIRO do, but what CSIRO does, what is your response to GenCost today and that finding on nuclear?
Well, my response, Sarah, is that I don't believe I know better than the CSIRO, Australia's premier scientific agency, and AEMO, who runs our grid. Ted thinks he does know better. That's the key difference between us. And I don't agree that the CSIRO is not qualified. They are one of the world's most respected scientific organisations. And, you know, when they brought their report out last year, Ted, as is perfect right, I went to them and said, I think you've got it wrong about how long nuclear reactors last and how often they're used, their capacity factor. And the CSIRO and AEMO, to their credit, have listened to Ted, run the numbers on his suggestions and found that his criticisms have no basis in evidence and it doesn't change the costs. So with respect, Ted has no grounds for complaint. He's raised concerns. The CSIRO, and I was very disappointed today to see Peter Dutton suggest some form of political interference. That's deeply offensive, not to me, he can say what he likes about me, but to the CSIRO. I'm deeply offended that the opposition would accuse them of being subject to political interference when they have, for the best part of 100 years, been completely independent of any politician, of any political interference. They brought this report out at complete arm's length from government, and its findings are just inarguable.
Well, let's come to that because I'm sure Ted O'Brien thinks they are arguable. Obviously, we're waiting for your long-awaited costings within days. How much will they differ from the CSIRO and AEMO estimates, that is, at nuclear between 133 and 222?
So there's 2 parts to this, Sarah. Firstly, it's the capital cost. I've already addressed that. Secondly, then, what you've just mentioned there is the levelised cost of energy, is the methodology they use. Again, if you listen to what the CSIRO says, I mean, Chris can have his view and he can talk about other people's views. Listen to the CSIRO themselves. One, they've conceded they're not the experts in this field. But secondly, the report today actually says that it is no substitute for an electricity system model. So what hits your bill at home, what hits your bill at your business, is actually a reflection of the total system cost.
Now I'm going to pause you there, Ted O'Brien. For this reason,
that is actually not what they do. But that's our focus.
We have an audience, and we need to bear in mind that it's a complex topic.
Of course,
not the three of us in the green room, although we can do that later. My question to you was: You're expecting your costings. How much will they differ from CSIRO and AEMO costings?
So
what will be your cost per kilowatt hour?
So let me answer. So you'll see the modelling over the next week from the coalition. And the capital costs of the CSIRO, I'm saying, is reasonable. Okay. But
and that's
what
the
you
cost
won't see...
to build nuclear reactors.
Next of a kind, the modern larger plants. What is different from the CSIRO is, as they themselves say, they do not model the total system cost. Our focus as a coalition is on getting prices down. You must calculate the total system cost, because that's what hits your bill at home. And for everyone who is at home, Chris can say all he likes, I can say all I like, but they can't deny their own lived experience. Power bills now in Australia are among the highest in the world. Labor promised a $275 reduction in power bills, but households are now paying up to $1,000 more than what Labor had promised. So we can talk about alternate plans, but the one thing that I'd like to talk about tonight more than anything is the current electricity system that Chris Bowen is overseeing.
We'll get to that in a moment, but let me just come back to you, Chris, on a different point, because Ted O'Brien is right that there are multiple countries in the world that have nuclear in their system, that rely on nuclear energy. There is a vast amount of research and development going into small modular reactors, not proven, but happening. Given that, why not lift the moratorium now, so that if that technology becomes competitive in Australia, we're ready to take advantage of it?
Well, let's look at the international experience, Sarah. At the moment, renewable investment dwarfs nuclear investment by 27 times. So the world is investing 27 times more in solar and wind and renewables than in nuclear. We're adding more solar and wind capacity every couple of weeks than is added in nuclear capacity all year. So the direction of travel around the world is very, very clear. And also when you look at international experience, there's no nuclear reactors under construction in the United States. The one that was closest, which Ted's talked about a lot, NuScale, was cancelled last year because of a 70% cost blowout. There is one in the United Kingdom, Hinkley C, which is running about 12 years late and is costing $92 billion Australian. $92 billion. Now, I don't believe that Australia should go down that road. I believe in an Australian energy system for Australian circumstances, designed by Australian experts.
Let me just come back to the question I asked you, because most experts we consult will say that the optimal for Australia, the optimal is a mix of all technologies. So why not put Australia in a position where they can exploit advantage in nuclear when they come?
We'll have solar, we'll have wind, we'll have hydro backed by gas peaking and firming under our model. But this idea that SMRs will come forward. Look,
and these are small modular
reactors. They're the next big thing. They always have been and they always will be. Now, what Ted's proposal is not just lifting the moratorium. He's proposing, to lift the moratorium and then to spend hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money on this, because he knows the private sector investment won't be there. That's the Liberal Party's policy.
Would you like to respond to that?
I would. I was interested to hear Chris talk about figures out of the UK, dollar figures.
Can you just stay with the big figure that Chris Bowen
what
just
was the big
raised
figure?
there?
60 or 90?
Hinkley C, 92 billion Australian.
92 billion. So Chris just started tonight's debate saying he doesn't know better than the CSIRO. But his next response is he's now using different figures from the CSIRO.
They're the figures in the United Kingdom.
Completely different
Australia
figures.
is not the United Kingdom.
And so I respectfully think the minister needs to make up his mind. Either he backs the capital costs of the CSIRO, or he doesn't. And here he is cherry-picking the CSIRO.
Let's go to that.
And I also note he didn't actually answer your question, which is,
correct.
If you're so confident, Minister, that nuclear energy will not work in Australia, why don't you agree to lift the moratorium? Stop making it illegal.
Well, that's not your proposal, and that would, as we've discussed before.
But it's a question. It's a question Sarah has put to you.
Just let the minister finish.
And Sarah asked the questions, not you, and I'm answering Sarah's question. because we are going down the road of the best mix for Australia as designed by the experts, and it would be a massive distraction. We need to send the message to the world that we are open for renewable investment and storage and firming and transmission.
You don't think that the investors of the world can make a determination themselves where to put their
clearly
dollars?
Ted doesn't either, because he is not proposing any private sector investment in renewable, in nuclear.
I'll speak for myself, so why don't you speak?
He's proposing hundreds of billions of dollars. That's,
Well, why don't you
can
respond
tell
to
me
that?
if I'm misrepresenting the Liberal Party's
100
plans.
Hundreds of billions of dollars. I think it's the number.
Taxpayers' money.
The number that has been put at over 600 billion. Is that going to be different from the number that you produce when your costings come out this week?
So over $600 billion is the real cost of Chris's plan, Labor's plan to get to 2050. Is that the one you're talking about?
I'm talking about the cost of introducing nuclear energy into the Australian energy mix, which has been costed at about somewhere north of $600 billion. When your costings come out, will they show something different?
So, Sarah, to be clear, if you're talking about the cost of our nuclear program being over $600 billion,
yes.
Again, we've just talked about the CSIRO. I have to make this point, because you mentioned the figure 600 billion, right? So the CSIRO talks about, on a kilowatt basis, around about $9,000 a kilowatt. Once you start talking about 600 billion, you're talking about 55,000 kilowatts. So again, which figures is the ABC focused on? Are you agreeing with CSIRO, or are you